We'll get started about 5 past.
Morning.
Morning. We'll get started about 5 past. I put the deck in the chat and also the Slack channel.
We wait, what regrets do the mountains have specifically?
I think Quentin is somewhere in the mountains where he can't be contacted.
No, it was play on. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It was a joke.
Yeah, looks like Ben is here. Awesome. Hi, Ben.
Hello.
All right, I see Ben, John Bull, Sam Lambert. Who am I missing? Is Brian Grant or Cantrell on the line?
Cantrell here.
Hey, morning, Brian.
Yeah.
Got you. Is Brian Grant here? There's a Brian here. I just can't tell if it's Grant.
Sorry, the Brian is me.
Okay, got it. All right, other Brian is Brian. So we'll give it another minute before we get started.
Good morning.
Morning. All right, final call for any other TOC members. Is Brian Grant here or Ken Owens? All righty.
So, Chris, we are short quorum, is that right?
Correct. So we can't make any decisions or anything formally on this call, but we're happy to have the meeting though. Alexis, Camille, and Quinton both sent their regrets. So we have Ben, Brian, John, and Sam here on the call right now. And Camille said she may show up for about half the call. So brief agenda today. If you go to slide 5, we have 2 community presentations, one from the Open Metrics community and the other from the Harbor community, which I believe both are on right now. Before I move on to those community presentations, I would like to point people to slide 6, which essentially is the backlog of essentially proposals or upcoming project presentations to the TOC. So we like to invite the TOC contributors and wider community to give any feedback on these. Some of these are seeking TOC sponsors, and some will actually be presenting in the future to the TOC and wider community. So without holding anything up further, is Richard Hartman on the line and would like to present open metrics from the Prometheus community?
Yes, I am.
Okay, cool. I will let you steer now. We are on slide 7.
7? Well,
Yep.
or 8 or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay.
Would you like me to do a screen share of the slides?
Yeah. I mean, I could probably do it here. Let me steer.
So I'm called in via pods, so I'm doing it locally on my own system. But if someone can screen share it to the Zoom session, this would be good.
Cool. All good. You see it now?
I can.
Yes.
It's fine.
Okay, go ahead.
Perfect. Okay, so open metrics. Basically what we are doing is we are taking the Prometheus format and putting this into its own little project. So a quick look at what we had before Prometheus came out. So basically what we had was we had a ton of different monitoring solutions, which were mostly based on really old stuff. There were a few new ones, but still most of those have proprietary formats. Some of them are really hard to implement and get right. Some are both. A lot of those have hierarchical data models, which don't really scale for anything cloud native. And most of those were jack of all trades. There was not a lot of focus on metrics or just doing metrics really well at scale. And a few newer ones actually tried to address this, but they didn't have the simplicity of operation. And there was basically one large standard which actually survived over time, SNMP. I come from the networking world. It's a lot of pain. It works, but it's painful. So this is before Prometheus entered. As most of you will probably know, Prometheus is actually, there's a feedback. Someone just, okay, whatever. Prometheus is actually a member. Sorry? I'm just going to continue.
The feedback is from Chris.
Okay. Yeah, so anyway, then Prometheus came out. As you all know, it's under the CNCF umbrella itself. Once Prometheus came out, a few things have changed since then. It really has become a de facto standard, or the exposition format has become both. Prometheus itself has become more or less the de facto standard within Cloud Native, and also the standard itself, or the exposition format itself, also has become a de facto standard in it as of itself. There's actually active upstream work between several different competitors within the umbrella of Prometheus, which is great to see. We have tons of adoption. Of course, it's really, really easy to expose data in Prometheus format. And while there's been a lot of operational experience as the basis for how to do Prometheus exposition format, still it has been done between only very few people, not like dozens or not between different vendors. And something we heard from people was basically that some people or some vendors are not really keen on supporting something which could be seen as something which is competing. Of course, it has a different name of something which is actually, you can install it instead of just having a standard. And especially for traditional vendors, something we encountered very often is that basically, unless there is an RFC, they don't really want to support it. Of course, it might go away, or whatever. So a quick look at slide 11, by the way, what we currently have in the Prometheus world. We are aware of over 300 different exporters which are exposing random data sources in the format which Prometheus can understand. By and large, those are not by us, they are by different people. So there is huge adoption. There's dozens of native integrations into various systems and partially even into boxes which you can buy off the shelf. And there is a ton of internal usage, but obviously that's not documented publicly, so we can't really count it or refer to it. But just gut feeling, Prometheus team gets a ton of people who actually tell them about where they do integrations, but obviously they are internal.
A key one there that I would like to point out is Kubernetes metrics are all entirely in Prometheus format.
Okay, cool.
Yep, exactly. So pretty much everything which is under the umbrella of CNCF is able to expose in Prometheus format. If you go to slide 12, these are the ingesters which we are currently aware of, which are already, as of today, ingesting the Prometheus format as it's currently defined. As you can see, there's both projects and companies which are doing this. So going from there, slide 13, we wanted to basically have something as of like a neutral brand to put all this under, and to also allow wider cooperation. As I said, we do have upstream work from competitors within the umbrella of Prometheus, but still we expect more people to be able and willing to work under the Open Metrics umbrella, which is another reason for doing this. Also, by ensuring that more people have a say, we actually broaden the base of what this can be used for. Something we want to have, we will also get to this at the end, an official RFC by the IETF. So we can actually point vendors at, okay, there's this random RFC, please go implement it. And coming along with that, also a officially registered content type and or MIME type, depending on if you look at it. There's two lists, but they're basically the same. And also getting one IANA port assignment for like a canonical exporter. The work within Open Metrics has been mainly done by Prometheus team. There's a few of us on this call right now, and also by Google and Uber. I believe there's also a few of those in the call right now. We have a bi-weekly 1-hour call, and there's work being done in between those calls. There's already been a few commitments by companies to support this. Slide 15. You can read them yourself. I don't have to read them out, but it's a few larger ones, so I dare say it's not bad. There's also already slide 16, something going on to increase collaboration within the umbrella of CNCF, specifically open tracing. I talked to Ted Young some time ago. They have a different focus, obviously, on several different levels, but still we want to try and align where it makes sense to basically have this come together. There's also others which hopefully will be in there. I also talked to Open Events some time ago, but that didn't really go very far. But yeah. And also for ObserveCon or ObserveCon, the name doesn't seem to be certain during KubeCon Seattle. We actually talked about expanding this a little bit from just tracing to more stuff, for example, metrics. So what's the current state of our little effort? Some of you at least will remember that we had a call last year already about Open Metrics, and quite frankly, we took more time than we thought we would take to get to the point where we are now. Mostly because there's tons of details to consider, and there was a ton of discussion regarding even really, really specific stuff, which is a good course. Quite frankly, it means we are covering a lot more bases, but on the other hand, it just ate up a lot of time. That being said, we have reached consensus, which is also why I asked Chris to be scheduled for this call. Because basically, while we still have quite some work to do, we agreed on what we actually want to do and how to do it. And for those who are familiar with the Prometheus exposition format, it looks largely the same as still, like there's one breaking change. Of course, now we have second timestamps, not millisecond timestamps. You get abilities which are totally new, like, for example, having the ability to expose events, arbitrary events, but in our use cases or the foreseen use cases, mainly trace IDs, to go along with, for example, a certain bucket of a histogram that you then can say, this is a trace of something which took longer than 10 seconds. There's a ton of uses for that, and just tighter and cleaner syntax overall. Last slide is number 18. Our next steps are to finalize the protobuf. It's pretty much done, but still we need to merge it back into the repository, blah, blah, blah. To actually submit an internet draft to the ITF, so we can actually have work done there in the scope, and then whatever comes out of that will probably be the final definition of open metrics. We will have at least one test suite, probably two, to really run against both the ingesters and the data sources, to really make sure that whoever is claiming to be open metrics compatible to really be open metrics compatible and not have something explode at some point. It will be version, of course, obvious, and we will have at least one client library, like canonical client library per language, which is officially recommended to be used with open metrics. There's a few obvious candidates which we can just enhance to support everything which open metrics is able to support, and just use those. And the final one, I hand over to Chris. Who seems to be muted.
Yeah, I know.
So the final one is to
go ahead.
Yes. So basically, like officially speaking, we still need a sponsor. Alexis already expressed his strong interest in having this. So I would assume that this is only formality still. We need to go through all the paperwork, so to speak.
Correct. You need to formalize a project proposal and seek one at least additional TOC sponsor, but we could do that after this. For now, I would like to open up the floor to any questions from the TOC or the wider community.
Can someone explain to me what the difference between all of these open initiatives are? Census, metrics, tracing. What's going on with all of this?
I can take that.
Just, if you want, sure.
Sure. So basically, there's from when we're thinking about observability, we see three different major types. There's event messages, aka logs. There's tracing, where you get trace data from between multiple services. And then there's metrics, which is mostly counters and numeric data only coming from applications. And there's both implementation side of how do you get this data out of the application, and then there's service side, how you actually query the data, so that you have Open Census, which is a library program that implements the client side of all of these. And then you have things like Prometheus and Jaeger that implement the server side or the monitoring side. And then Open Metrics is kind of something we're looking for a group like Open Census to adopt. So when they want to collect and expose metric data, they use the Open Metrics format because it allows the wider CNCF community to ingest the metrics from an Open Census source. Does that make sense?
So you're saying that you're creating a spec by which things like Prometheus can format these to be better consumed past that. Is that right? Is it like Prometheus ++? I guess that's the piece that is confusing to me.
Yeah, so it's Prometheus format. So when an application wants to expose data for Prometheus to collect, it's called the Prometheus exposition format, and it's we didn't have an example in the slides, but it's a very simple way of collecting and exposing data for Prometheus to collect, and that's going to be basically Prometheus exposition ++.
And the longer term goal, or even the short term goal, is basically to enable both, like have the in between. Of course, then you can have tons of different expositions in various pieces of software about their own state. And then on the other hand, you have several different vendors or projects implementing monitoring solutions which can actually ingest this data. And so that you will not have to re-implement a ton of different proprietary standards. There's something in between, which is the lingua franca between all those generators of data and all those ingesters of the monitoring data.
Camille, does that make sense? She might have dropped as well. It sounds like she was. That's it.
Yep.
This is Brian Cantrell. I would be happy to co-sponsor this with Alexis, so we can dig in with the team. One question I do have is on the breaking change to the Prometheus format. I assume that is being socialized back with the Prometheus folks, and that will be an actual rev of the format, or maybe you can expand on that a little bit of detail.
Basically,
yeah, basically you have a different. Basically, you have a different version, and 3 of Prometheus team are currently on the call. I'm one of them. Formally, Prometheus team didn't yet adopt open metrics. Of course, they can't. Of course, it's not officially existing. Yet the intention is to obviously do it, else we wouldn't be doing this effort. So it's a breaking change, but you have a version upgrade, and if you expose with the old version, well, it's milliseconds, and if you use the new version, it's seconds.
Yeah, the intention
Even
is
Prometheus
that we will,
exposition format is. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, the intention is that as soon as it's actually done, we will implement support for it in Prometheus.
Okay, and could you actually just go into the technical detail of the change itself just for a second?
So in the only real breaking change so far is that for transiting metrics between time series databases, you can expose the timestamp that for each sample. And in the original Prometheus format, it was a uint64 timestamp in milliseconds from epoch. And we're going to be switching that to a float 64 seconds since epoch.
Okay. Okay. All right. Is that going to be okay?
Most applications don't even implement this because they don't implement the timestamp functionality in the output because the timestamp of the output is now. This is only really used for Prometheus to Prometheus federation. So most applications don't have to change anything.
Is the intent here to provide finer than millisecond resolution?
It's float. So
yes.
Yeah, I know. I get that.
It's mostly so that it's more readable in terms of the fact that so there is the option for higher resolution for systems that want higher resolution than millisecond, but also because there are influx data supports nanosecond resolution, so we wanted to be able to support them as well. So it will be some kind of float that exposes that level of detail.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I guess I'd be curious on more detail on the rationale for that. You're introducing a bunch of failure modes that you don't have currently by introducing floating point there. But And I just need to ramp up.
No, we already have floating point for, well, actually we already have floats for the actual values, and these are being used with every single timestamp. Every single value of every single time series already has float. Timestamps themselves are fully optional. So it's orders and orders of magnitude different, more usage of floats anyway. It's mostly for human readability. Of course, a lot of humans will look at it, at least with the text format. You also have a proto format where it's different, obviously.
But there are resolution consequences for that. So the,
yes.
I understand, obviously the values are clearly going to be in floating point, like that is without question, but to put to treat time as a floating point value, that means that there are resolution consequences for that. And I'll ramp up on the discussion. I'm sure
yes.
you had a bunch of discussion.
No, we actually went into this in depth during the discussion, and for nanoseconds, float 64 with seconds doesn't cut it. That's obvious. For nanoseconds, we're not really certain that you would actually be doing metrics on nanoseconds. Events, yes. Metrics, we did look at it. Some of the collaborators also had concerns there, but in the end, we got out with there's no actual need for nanoseconds for metrics, at least. Open metrics is intended to basically, as soon as we have, well, as soon as it's weird, but you can also put float 128 as well if you wanted to. And the spec is intended to basically take it if you need it, and then anyone who can only do float 64 just cuts up the extra precision and is done.
Okay. Well, like I said, I'm happy to co-sponsor this work,
cool.
And then you can point me to the wherever the technical discussion on this is taking place, so I can understand the ramifications of that. I mean, not to question the decisions. I just want to understand it.
Yeah, I just want to be sensitive to other people's time too. So if there's any follow-up discussion, please talk to Brian directly and the team. Okay. So thank you, Open Metrics folks.
And Chris, maybe if I may.
Sorry. Lee, go ahead.
Yeah, just the briefest of questions there. So, Ben and Richard, and I guess, Brian, it's been a while since I've been on the Open Metrics call. And at the time, I guess I'm wondering if in that time, if you've gotten a chance to vet sort of the IETF's appetite around, a standard proposal?
No, for a simple reason that you must not enter this then before you actually have an internet draft of some sort of value. Else you will be ignored and this will be counted against you in the long term. I actually have one RFC to my name, so I went through this valley of pain. There is no use in actually submitting anything to the IETF working groups before you actually have a draft. And what we basically do is we finish the draft, and then we go more or less shopping around for working groups which are interested. And if none is interested, then we can still submit as independent submission. But basically during this phase, then if there's people on the working groups or vendors who have people on the working groups, then it's the time to do a concerted push on, yes, we want to have this in the IETF and or in this specific working group. But this comes only after we have finished the internet draft.
And if the IETF is being too problematic, it would be also, I think it'd be worthwhile for the CNCF to have its own repository of RFC documents.
Yeah, I mean, we have some resources to help too with the IETF, but yeah, definitely point taken, Brian. It's a good idea.
Yeah, and also if so, IETF is not really quick. So what can happen is, for example, that we have Open Metrics 1.0. This is published within the CNCF, blah blah blah, and then a 1.1, if there's any changes, is published both within the CNCF and within the IETF, for example. But this has to be seen. We'll figure it out as we go. We can't do anything else anyway.
Thanks. And anything else from you, Lee?
No, thank you. Makes sense.
All right, cool. All right, I'm gonna wrap it up with the Open Metrics team. So thanks again, and I'll gladly work with you on sponsorship now that you have two sponsors. So I'm gonna go hand it off to the Harbor team and Clint. So go ahead.
Okay, is everybody seeing the presentation?
Yeah, I see it. Good for me.
Okay. So hello, TOC and community. Glad to be here today presenting to you. I think you guys have probably recognized my name from presenting relating to storage and the SWG in the past few years. Most recently, I actually joined VMware, leading the upstream activities with Kubernetes and CNCF. And so my focus is storage and a few things that are beyond that as well. So today I'm really excited to present to you one of the homegrown projects that we have here at VMware. And I think it's going to be pretty important to the cloud native ecosystem. So this is Project Harbor. So Harbor is an open source trusted cloud native registry. It originated within our China R&D group as a container registry to support our solutions. Through the assistance of our open source program office, we actually open sourced Harbor back in 2016. So Harbor is a production ready with lots of users in China and across the world. And I'll show you guys the list of them towards the end of the presentation. Supporting me today on this call, I also have James Zabala, Henry Zhang, and Stephen Zhu. So what's the background? Container registries are critical components within these cloud native environments. And when we're looking at the different environments, whether it's development, testing, and production, they all have some key requirements or key things that they think about. The first thing is trust. Like as we store and retrieve images and content and artifacts, we need to be able to validate that the images that are signed. Right? We need to be able to validate that they don't have any dependencies that have been tampered with. We also need a certain form of compliance. So we need to be able to validate that the dependencies meet whatever requirements, that they have been scanned for security vulnerabilities, and that they're likely free from vulnerabilities based on whatever policies that we set. And the third thing is that we need to be able to rely on the performance. So the performance needs to be predictable. So if I include my registry as a key component within my CI/CD process, I need to validate that I'm going to get a predictable level of performance as I push and pull images. And then the last thing is interoperability. So we need to be able to validate that, we need to be able to integrate our registry within our cloud native environments so that we can leverage all of our existing processes. And so it really serves as a key component within these environments. And finally, when we look at the multi-cloud world that we're evolving towards, we need to have a certain form of portability for this type of service. So having registries that may differ in different ways across different public clouds is challenging to be able to rely on those things. So portability and multi-cloud, registries provide an important part of that. So the focus of Harbor is to be a trusted cloud native registry. And this is that stores, signs, and scans content. The mission is to provide these cloud native environments the ability to confidently manage and serve container images. So what makes the trusted cloud native registry? We think that there's three key features that we can highlight that Harbor delivers. The first is that it's a multi-tenant content signing and validation. So this means that we can have many consumers and users all pointing at the same registry that have their own keys where they can sign and validate content. The second is that we can form policies and we can form security and vulnerability analysis so that as we push and pull images, we can actually accept or deny those pushes and pulls based on policies and based on the status of the scanning of images. And then the third is integration to role-based access control. So we have multi-tenancy, and then you should be able to hook in that multi-tenancy to your existing identity systems to enable role-based access control. There's a couple other features that our users of Harbor tend to enjoy as well. So one of those to highlight is image replication between instances. So this allows independent Harbor instances to actually replicate the content between themselves. And then the other one is an internationalization. So we've got a large community within China. So naturally we have two main languages within the project today, English and Chinese. In terms of the operational experience for Harbor, today it is deployed within containers. So we've got beta support for Helm chart. We also use Docker Compose, and that's what deploys the numerous services that support Harbor. So we're looking to expand on that experience and to make it even more cloud native friendly, where we start taking advantage of the container orchestrators to make it easier to actually operate Harbor in the long term. The other thing to highlight here in terms of operational experience is that Harbor really integrates many open source components that are proven components out there today. So I'll talk about that here on the next slide for architecture. So in the middle of this slide, there's a gray box which represents all of the different Harbor components that make the service work. There's some key components, which are the ones in blue, which is the code for Harbor. So here we have a core service for your API and GUI. You've got your job service and your admin service, and then on the right side, essentially the packaging of everything together. So the blue are the real Harbor components. In the pink, we have the third-party components. So we have the Docker registry. We've got the vulnerability scanning from CoreOS through Claire, and we've got the trusted content through CNCF's Notary project. Below the pink boxes, you have the green boxes, which represent the persistence. So we've got Redis and Postgres supporting these services. And then outside of the gray box, which is really outside of the packaging of Harbor, you've got reliant services such as your local remote storage or block, which is a block file or object to support persistence. And then on the left side, you've got the identity integration for LDAP and Active Directory. So this forms the architecture of Harbor. So to give you a little peek at the web interface, this is what it looks like for a user who's going to use the GUI. Now, Harbor is, of course, fully API driven, and the GUI sits on top. But this gives you a little snapshot of what this actually looks like. So a user would go in, they'd go to the top left, you can see it says projects. So they'd open a project, which is their tenancy, our form of tenancy. And then they'd have the repository in there, which is the production/Golang. In this case, you can see that there's one image that's listed in this repo, and there's one version, 1.60-corp. We have, through Claire, we're highlighting the vulnerability scanning. So you can see that there's 7 vulnerability things to be actually looking at. And this may actually, in terms of the policy that we set for this user, this may mean that we decline any of the polls at this point because it's got a invalid scan. On the right of that, we're actually showing the notary status. So you can see that it's signed with that green checkbox. So the history of the project. It was started in 2014 again within the China R&D facility for VMware. We later open sourced it 2 years later. And then in the past 2 years, we've actually been shipping Harbor as a key component within some of VMware's container solutions. So we've got 2 key products that Harbor actually supports with its registry services. Over the past 2 years since it's been open sourced, we've actually grown from 1,000 to 2,000 to now 4,000 stars. Future integrations are actually a really interesting category that we're looking at, or in terms of roadmap. I think one of the most important things that we're looking at has to do with the OCI initiative. So if you looked at that architecture slide, we've got Docker's registry. There's a initiative within OCI to start formalizing, what that registry API looks like, and it's taking place within this distribution group. So we're looking at a future integration for implementing the distribution spec as it gets finalized. Other than that, we've also got other key focuses from the cloud native ecosystem, whether it's in Kubernetes or the open service broker API or Helm, et cetera. So lots of really interesting stuff to look at. So Harbor is a trusted cloud native registry. But it also has the ability to focus on certain orchestrators within that ecosystem. So one of those natural orchestrators for CNCF is, of course, Kubernetes. But I think a valid, or taking advantage of an orchestrator or building a great user experience around an orchestration tool is something that's very valid for this project. But the short term, Kubernetes is the one that we're looking at. So working towards our 1.60 timeframe, there's some key things that we can highlight that we're focusing on. The first is storing Helm charts. So being able to expand beyond what we do today, which is container images for artifacts, and thinking about other things that may be important and aligned to the cloud native ecosystem. So storing of Helm charts and scanning and validation and everything we do with container images is one of those things that we're looking at delivering. The next thing is using a Helm chart for simple deployment of Harbor. So being able to leverage a Helm chart to just simply deploy it and have it stand up on any Kubernetes environment. Beyond that, we have custom controller that we're looking at. And I think there's lots of opportunity here, whether it's to enable the management of Harbor to help with availability through expanding and adding service pods on demand, or it's to be able to take advantage of the networking and storage features to be able to scale out our Harbor instances as networking and storage requirements change. Another key thing for the controller is to be able to monitor the namespaces within Kubernetes. So if we want to be able to have Harbor monitor namespaces, it could actually create within its own tenancy these replicated namespaces so that we can provide those to users on demand. So beyond that, custom resources could also be important to Harbor. So if we're extending Harbor to be more self-managed and all done through the container orchestrator, then leveraging CRDs would allow users to be able to consume and manage their own images. And then lastly, we're looking at a consistent management experience by way of a Harbor CTL or Harbor Cuddle, right? So we want to be able to provide a Kubernetes user the same type of experience that they would be used to, all by way of this custom controller. So Harbor has a pretty big development team as an open source project internally at VMware right now. So we've got a product manager, we've got 8 full-time developers and others within VMware that help support the project. Over the lifetime of the project, since it's been open source, we've had 18 releases, 4,771 commits, and there's about 23 non-VMware committers, which is what we'd consider more material, where they've done 50+ lines of code. So here's the users. There's lots of big names that we can highlight. Some are within China, some are across the US, but you see that top line for Trend Micro, BMC, Priority Payments. These are all probably bigger names that lots of us on the call recognize. I'll focus on 2 really quick. So OnStar, which we're highlighting in terms of their Shanghai joint venture, they have many development and test environments, and they leverage Harbor because of its ability to integrate within their CI/CD. So they want to be able to have their dev test environments, and they want to be able to replicate images among them, and they want a certain level of predictability of performance for the registry because it's a part of their CI/CD. So they leverage it pretty extensively. The other one to highlight here is KaiCloud. KaiCloud is a Kubernetes as a service provider, and behind the scenes, Harbor is what supplies their container images. So there's lots of other users to highlight. Some of those are CNCF member companies as listed here. But I think another interesting link to look at is related to JD.com. So as a Platinum member, they actually wrote up an article, which I have a link to at the bottom here, where they described their journey from OpenStack to Kubernetes. And in that journey, Harbor is called out as one of those key components that helps them make that journey. So lots of users within China, but we also have lots of other users across the US, some referenceable and some not. So we believe that a thriving community collaborating on a trusted registry is important. From VMware's perspective, we plan to continue our current management and engineering support of the project with new governance. So that means the 8 full-time engineers that we have, the product manager, we expect that they'll still be in place as we look at the future of it within a foundation. We're looking for collaborators for a few key reasons. We want to get people to help us lead on strategy and direction. We want to accelerate the feature development, and we want to get a focus on interoperability with other CNCF projects. I believe pretty firmly that there's definitely some room to improve user experience and take advantage of the COs and really fit within these cloud-native environments. But there's lots of work to be done to make that interoperability happen. So we think that the foundation can help grow the Harbor community by providing a vendor-neutral home to support the project. So here's a few other key things. First of all, so Harbor is already licensed as Apache v2. It's got a trademark to the name. So we're definitely willing to be transferring that to the foundation. We already have a couple key TOC sponsors. So Quentin Huell and Ken Owens have already volunteered to help sponsor the project. So we thank these gentlemen for that and the support that we need moving forward. And we'll be targeting to create a proposal and submitting that for the week of July 9th. So with that, thank you, and we'll open it for questions.
Hey, Clint, this is Brian Grant.
Hey, Brian.
So are most of the users on-premise as opposed to on public clouds, other than the clouds that are using it to implement their registries themselves?
Yeah, I think today the majority of the users are going to be on-premise users. Yes.
So for the the underlying object storage API, is that effectively an S3 compatible API? Or are there particular object stores that are supported?
Yeah, that exactly. It's an S3 API that we support at the back end. James, do you have any more information about that in terms of what which ones that we have more experience with, or which ones people are using? James or Henry out there?
Yeah, this is Henry from China. Actually, there's a lot of users using the Harbor on-prem, as well as they are deploying in the Amazon cloud and all kinds of cloud, Ali cloud, and all kinds of cloud environment. If they are deploying on-prem, they can use like local file system for the storage. If they're deploying Harbor in the cloud, they could leverage any object storage in the cloud. So there are many users deploying either in the cloud or on-prem using various kinds of storage.
Okay, so for those that are running on the clouds, does it was mentioned that Harbor has support for multi-tenancy. Does Harbor support some kind of authentication and authorization delegation so that you can use, the user can use their own credentials in the object store? Or how does that work?
Right now, the user usually has the object storage or the storage in the cloud, mostly using their cloud credential, like Amazon AWS credential. It has nothing to do with the user authentication part of the Harbor. So that's a different authentication. So it's not the same.
Okay.
Is that clear, Brian? So you've got you configure the S3 storage once for the Harbor service, and then the tenancies on top of that?
Yes.
I mean, the storage is done by the Docker, the open source Docker registry, not directly by Harbor. So it's basically exactly what's upstream, which doesn't currently have support for pass-through credentials.
And that, it could be an opportunity for improvement as we look at the distribution spec, et cetera. Yeah. Great. Any other questions?
Yeah, hey, Clint, this one has been asked in the past, maybe not most recently, but do you have a quick perspective of other similar tools in the space? Granted, your Harbor, envelopes other open source tools like Claire and the V2 registry, et cetera, to kind of bring together something of a hub, if you will?
Yeah. Can we answer that in the proposal? Maybe we'll follow up and give kind of a snapshot from our view of what's going on. I think my summary is that lots of folks are using the public registries, and some of these services may be provided through public registries, but this is really a open source, portable, trusted cloud native registry. So let's try to follow up with that in the proposal, because it can be a pretty detailed conversation. Is that fair?
That'd be great. I'd love to see a matrix.
Okay.
Maybe another way to ask that is, what would be the main motivation to use a self-hosted open source registry as opposed to one of the hosted vendor registries?
I think it's the consistent user experience, right? So Harbor has a certain set of features, and Harbor can be ran on top of any cloud that you want it to, whether it's on-prem or on the public cloud. And it can also replicate, amongst itself. So you get that consistent experience, you get the replication capability. And it's no guarantee if you're going from one cloud to another today, what services they're going to provide with their registry.
Okay, thanks.
Any more questions?
Yeah, I guess, Clint, just to confirm that the proposal is for Sandbox?
We're consulting with the sponsors right now to decide on what level to introduce it at. So we're open for suggestions and feedback on what the TOC thinks would be the right level. We think that when you look at the status of the project in terms of the history and the users, that we meet the objective criteria to be incubation, but we're looking for feedback from the TOC on that.
Okay. And I guess just to reflect real quick, it was, I forget the statistics, it was something like 23 different contributors other than VMware.
That's right.
And greater than 50 plus lines of.
Yeah, and lots of publicly referenceable users.
Mm-hmm. But in terms of project governance and kind of maintainers, not of VMware.
Yeah.
Are there any non-VMware maintainers?
Not maintainers at this point, but that's something that we're working towards.
So I'll jump in here real quick. This is Matt Farina. One of the things that can be a problem is when something isn't in a vendor neutral space, it can be hard to get outside maintainers. I've talked to some other projects about this, and that's one of the reasons sometimes they want to go towards a vendor neutral space, is to enable them to bring on other maintainers and contributors who otherwise couldn't do it.
Yeah, very well said, Matt. Totally agree.
Any other questions?
All right. Thanks for the time. Looking forward to submitting that proposal and talking to the community more about it.
Cool. Thank you, Clinton folks. All right, moving on. So it's a couple things to discuss, but mostly we're kind of going to wrap up today. So if you go through slides 34, just a reminder that we have working groups that meet regularly. Slide 35, we have a list of kind of different project backlog. Slide 36, we have 3 events that will be coming up over the next 12 months. So we have our first event in China in November 14th and 15th in Shanghai. December 11th through 13th is our flagship event in North America in Seattle. And then we're going to do our European event next year in May in Barcelona. So CFP is open for Shanghai and Seattle. So please submit talks if you haven't already. In terms of next meetings, our next formal meeting with the TOC will be July 3rd, and we'll be hearing from the TIKV project at that time. So with that being said, we have about 8 minutes left. I don't know if there's any questions or topics that the TOC would like to cover the community. Otherwise, we could end this call a little bit early.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks,
All right.
Chris.
All right, I'll take that silence as we'll wrap things up. So thanks a lot to our presenters, and I'll see you in a couple weeks. All right, take care.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.
No
Goodbye.
problem.